Egypt Air Flight 648, November 23, 1985. It's a normal day at Athens Airport in Greece, and people are busy boarding the Egypt Air Flight 648, a Boeing 737, for a trip to Cairo. The plane was carrying a total of 92 people, including passengers and crew members, and everyone was probably thinking about visiting the pyramids and maybe riding the camels in the desert. However, a group of very uninvited guests decided to crash the party, literally. You see, at around 8:15 p.m., the plane takes off, and only 10 minutes later, 3 hijackers from the Abu Nidal organization make their move. These guys were armed with guns and demands that were far more outrageous than any extra legroom request, and the terrorists were led by Omar Rezak. With one goal in mind, they tried to take control of the plane, and when a sky marshal named Mustafa Kamal tried to fight them off, these guys just shot him down. As if the situation wasn't already terrifying and intense, the hijackers forced the pilot to descend the plane from 37,000 feet to 14,000 feet, which caused the oxygen masks to drop. Let's just say the only thing scarier than airplane food is a cabin full of panicked passengers gasping for air. The situation got way worse because after a while the plane started to run out of fuel, so the hijackers forced the pilot to land in Malta. However, the Maltese authorities didn't want any drama on their soil and refused to refuel the plane, which made the bad guys even madder. So they began picking out passengers they believed to be Israeli or American and started to shoot and throw them off the plane. Yeah, it's as horrific as it sounds. Well, after 24 hours of negotiations that went about as smoothly as a turkey trying to dance ballet, Egyptian commandos finally arrived and stormed the plane. But things didn't exactly go according to plan. Instead of a clean rescue operation, gunfire erupted, and grenades were tossed around like popcorn at a movie theater. The interior of the plane was basically turned into a fiery death trap. Sadly, when the dust and smoke finally settled, 60 of the 92 passengers and crew members had already perished. As for the hijackers, 2 out of 3 of them were killed, and only Omar Rezak survived. He was extradited to the US, and in 1996, Rezak was tried and convicted on charges related to hijacking and terrorism, and then sentenced to life in prison. PanAm Flight 73, September 5, 1986. The 380 passengers and 13 crew members of the PanAm Flight 73 were all getting ready for an early morning flight from Mumbai to New York, with stops in Karachi, Pakistan, and Frankfurt, Germany, when 4 men dressed in airport security uniforms stormed the aircraft with serious firearms. They were members of the Abu Nidal organization who would literally take the title of serial hijackers of the 80s with no contest. Well, they took control of the plane and demanded that the crew close all the doors. And just like that, the flight that never got off the ground suddenly became the center of a deadly standoff. You see, the hijackers wanted to use the passengers and the plane as bargaining chips to demand the release of their imprisoned comrades. So they forced the flight attendants to collect passports, looking for American citizens to use as prime hostages. If you think airline food gives you anxiety, imagine being stuck on a hijacked plane for 17 hours. Fortunately, the attendants quickly realized what was actually going on and hid some of the American passports to protect those passengers. One of the flight attendants, a 23-year-old woman named Nirja Banat, even managed to sneak out a distress signal, alerting airport authorities about the hijacking. As the hours dragged on and negotiations went nowhere, the hijackers grew increasingly agitated, and in another horrific twist of really bad luck, the plane's auxiliary power unit, which provides power when the engines aren't running, ran out, plunging the cabin into darkness. In the chaos, the hijackers began firing at passengers and setting off explosives. It was honestly a complete nightmare scenario that no one could have anticipated. During the shooting, Nirja Banat made the ultimate sacrifice and opened one of the emergency exits to enable passengers to escape. Sadly, she was shot by one of the bad guys and tragically lost her life. But her courage saved countless lives, and she was later posthumously awarded several bravery awards, including the Ashoka Chakra, India's highest peacetime military decoration. When the Pakistani commandos finally stormed the aircraft, they managed to capture the hijackers, but the siege left 20 passengers dead and over 100 injured. The hijackers were arrested and tried in Pakistan, where they all received life sentences. Indian Airlines Flight 814, December 24, 1999. It's Christmas Eve. People are full of festive spirit, thinking about gifts, holiday meals, and family time. Meanwhile, at Tribhuvan International International Airport in Kathmandu, Nepal, Indian Airlines Flight 814 is preparing for takeoff, and the Airbus A300 has 176 people on board, including 9 crew members and 167 passengers. The flight, bound for New Delhi, was happily cruising along when 5 armed men stormed the cockpit at exactly 5:30 p.m., waving guns and knives around like they were auditioning for the worst Die Hard sequel ever. The hijackers, members of a Pakistan-based terrorist group called Harkat-ul-Mujahideen, quickly took control of the plane, and suddenly, the once cheerful passengers were now stuck in a real-life action movie without the comfort of popcorn or Bruce Willis to save the day. Well, in typical hijacking spirit, the hijackers demand that the pilot change, and the planes start making stops like a bus on a bad route. First, they landed in Amritsar, India, where they demanded the plane gets refueled. But the Indian officials tried to delay and buy time, which just pissed them off, so they threatened to start killing passengers, and the plane was forced to leave without refueling. The plane then heads to Lahore, Pakistan, and after a refueling pit stop, they're back in the air and headed to, wait for it, Kandahar, Afghanistan, which was under Taliban control at the time. If you're thinking this sounds like the worst vacation ever, you'd be right. Now, it was when they landed in Kandahar that these guys started to make their demands known. Firstly, they wanted the release of 3 high-profile terrorists from Indian prisons, specifically a man named Masood Azhar. They also demanded $200 million in cash, because, hijacking a plane apparently requires a bonus. The Indian government finds itself in a heart-wrenching situation, and after 7 long days of negotiations and the unfortunate murder of one passenger, Rupin Katyal, the Indian government agrees to release the 3 terrorists. And so, on December 31st, 1999, the swap was made. Thankfully, all the hostages were set free. But sadly, the hijackers, along with the 3 released terrorists and $200 million in cash, made a clean getaway. Yes, they were literally out of sight and out of flight. TWA Flight 847, June 14th, 1985. If you're one of those people who love to visit new countries and enjoy new experiences, then you'd know that air travel is literally one of the only ways to achieve this. But on June 14th, 1985, the promise of a simple flight from Athens, Greece to Rome, Italy aboard TWA Flight 847 turned into a living nightmare that went on for 17 agonizing days. The nightmare started as a very normal boarding day, as passengers, including American tourists, businessmen, and U.S. military personnel, all settled into their seats, expecting nothing more than a routine flight. But unbeknownst to everyone, 2 armed members of the military group Hezbollah were also boarding. You see, these hijackers, Ali Atwa and Muhammad Ali Hamadi, had no intention of enjoying the flight's hospitality, but had come prepared with grenades and guns that would turn the entire journey into a perilous ordeal. Well, shortly after takeoff, just as the plane was soaring over the Mediterranean, the hijackers sprang into action and stormed the cockpit first. As soon as they took over the air control, they contacted the American government and started to make demands that would set the stage for an international crisis. These guys basically demanded the release of 700 Shiite prisoners from Israeli jails, and that it should happen all within 24 hours. And to ensure that the government understood that they meant business, these guys started to separate the passengers based on nationality. The Americans and U.S. military members were singled out, with threats to start killing them one by one after each hour passed, and their demands were not met. One of the most chilling moments came when Robert Stetham, a young U.S. Navy diver, was beaten, then shot to death by the hijackers, with his body cruelly dumped on the tarmac at the Beirut airport. What made this hijacking so horrible wasn't just the violence and fear, but the prolonged suffering of the passengers and crew. Can you imagine being held captive on a plane for more than 2 weeks, with armed hijackers constantly breathing down your neck and killing people right in front of you? It must have been stale, undiluted terror. Well, after 17 days of being trapped in an endless cycle of fear, with no certainty about their fate, the remaining hostages were finally released in Beirut, thanks to complex negotiations and international pressure. Now, you'd think that justice and karma would have come down like a ton of bricks on the hijackers, right? Well, wrong, because while Ali Atwa was captured, he was later released in a prisoner exchange deal, a development that left many wondering how someone so dangerous could walk free. Then, as for Muhammad Ali Hamadi, the mastermind of the hijacking and the man responsible for the death of Robert Stetham, he too was arrested in Germany in 1987 and sentenced to life in prison. But in a twist that could only be described as infuriating, he was released in 2005 and returned to Lebanon, despite efforts by the United States to extradite him. Air France Flight Flight 8969, December 24, 1994. It was exactly one day to Christmas in 1994, and people were, as usual, trying to fly home to their loved ones and families, so it was an unusually busy day at the airport. The Air France Flight 8969 was scheduled to fly from Algiers, Algeria to Paris, France, and it was supposed to be a smooth routine flight, but instead the unfortunate passengers got an armed takeover by 4 members of the armed Islamic group GIA, and they only had one goal in mind: to hijack the plane and use it as a weapon. These guys came in wearing police uniforms, which just made the whole situation a lot more diabolical. The hijackers declared they were fighting for their cause, and told the passengers and everyone else listening that if the government didn't listen to their demands, they would fly the plane to Paris and crash it into the Eiffel Tower. Now, you know that announcement that says, in case of an emergency, remain calm? Well, this emergency was the kind that would make even the calmest Zen master break into a cold sweat. People obviously started to panic hard, screaming and begging for their lives. But for 2 whole days, the hijackers kept the plane hostage in Algiers. They demanded that the government release imprisoned members of their terrorist group, and when the negotiations stalled, these guys started executing hostages to show they meant business. They killed 3 passengers and were going to kill more, but thankfully the French government stepped in, coordinating with a special forces unit, and a plan was put in motion. Everything came to a boiling point on December 26th, when a French elite anti-terrorism unit, GIGN, stormed the aircraft in a dramatic rescue operation. The gun battle lasted for 20 minutes, and in the end, all 4 hijackers were killed. Miraculously, the remaining 229 hostages were alive and free, and even though many came out with injuries, they were still very grateful to be alive. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, November 23, 1996. On a seemingly regular Saturday morning, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, a Boeing 767, was preparing for a routine trip from Addis Ababa, Ethiopian, to Nairobi, Kenya, with further stops in Brazzaville, Lagos, and Abidjan. The plane was carrying a total of 175 people, which included 163 passengers and 12 crew members, and as people were settling in, probably arguing over window seats and bracing themselves for airplane food, they were sadly utterly unaware of the horror that awaited. Well, shortly after takeoff, 3 men who were Ethiopian asylum seekers claiming to be escaping political persecution hijacked the plane and demanded that the pilots fly them to Australia. Yes, Australia, a destination so far away that even the plane might have laughed if it could. These guys were armed with an axe, a fire extinguisher, and a claim that they had a bomb, which the authorities later discovered was a big lie. Anyways, the pilot, Captain Lael Abate, calmly tried to explain that a Boeing 767 simply didn't have the fuel to make that long journey, but the hijackers weren't exactly aviation experts, so they refused to listen and started threatening violence if the plane didn't head toward Australia. Well, the captain, being a smart man, decided to just start flying along the eastern coast of Africa, hoping for a miracle. However, as the flight continued, fuel started running out, and once again, Captain Abate made multiple attempts to reason with the hijackers, but they were stubbornly delusional, refusing to let the plane land to refuel. Imagine being on a road trip with someone who won't stop for gas no matter how empty the tank gets. Now multiply that by 1,000 and you've got an idea of how grim things were getting. Eventually, reality couldn't be ignored any longer because now the plane was literally running on fumes, so the passengers had to prepare for a crash landing. And this is where things took a very sad and horrifying turn. So the captain aimed to crash land in the Indian Ocean, near the Comoros Islands, hoping that help would be nearby. Now as the plane approached the water, it made a belly landing attempt, but one of the wings clipped the water, causing the aircraft to break apart into a catastrophic crash. Out of the 175 people on board, 125 lost their lives in the crash. However, 50 people miraculously survived, largely thanks to Captain Abate's incredible efforts to guide the plane to the ocean with as much control as possible. The survivors managed to escape the sinking wreckage and swim to shore, where they were helped by resort guests and staff who rushed to the scene. 2 of the hijackers also lost their lives in the crash, and the 3rd guy was arrested swiftly and sentenced to life in prison, where he had plenty of time to think about his terrible geography skills and disastrous choices. China Northern Airlines Flight 6136, May 7, 2002. Just imagine you wake up very early to catch your flight to China, only to end up as a burnt, crisp body somewhere in the ocean. It sounds like a scene from a horror movie, right? Well, this was sadly the unfortunate reality for all 112 people on board the McDonnell Douglas MD-82 of China Northern Airlines Flight 6136. So on May 7, 2002, the plane took took off at precisely 8:37 p.m., but roughly 20 minutes before the plane was due to land, disaster struck. Apparently, a passenger, later identified as a man facing severe financial troubles, decided to take his personal problems to the most horrific extreme and set fire to gasoline he smuggled on board, igniting a blaze that quickly became uncontrollable. You heard that right, smuggled gasoline. He managed to get fuel onto the plane, which is enough to make you never complain about strict airport security measures again. As expected with fire, the flames spread rapidly, and soon the cabin turned into a terrifying inferno, and there was literally no way to stop the fire. Imagine trying to breathe as thick, acrid smoke fills the cabin, all while the plane hurtles through the sky. It's a scene you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. The pilots, still desperately trying to save the plane and everyone on board, attempt an emergency landing, but with the fire raging, they lose control, and at 9:32 p.m., just 6 minutes before the scheduled landing, the plane crashes into the sea off the coast of Dalian. The impact was catastrophic, and all 112 people on board lost their lives in the tragic ordeal. The crash of Flight 6136 led to a national outcry in China, and a thorough investigation into how the passenger managed to bring gasoline onto the plane successfully. The incident exposed serious flaws in airport security and led to a tightening of safety measures to prevent such an event from happening again. Korean Air Flight 858, November 29, 1987. Picture this. It's November 29, 1987, and you're on a plane bound for Seoul. You've got your seatbelt fastened, the flight attendants are giving the usual safety briefing, and passengers are settling in for what's supposed to be a long but routine journey. Little do you know, your flight is about to be the centerpiece of a terrifying espionage drama starring none other than the North Korean government. So basically, the Korean Air Flight 858, a Boeing 707, took off from Baghdad, Iraq, with stopovers planned in Abu Dhabi and Bangkok before its final destination, Seoul, South Korea. And there were 115 people on board, made up of 104 passengers and 11 crew members. However, amongst the unsuspecting passengers were 2 North Korean operatives, disguised as an innocent-looking Japanese father and daughter. Their mission wasn't just to rack up frequent flyer miles, but to carry out an act of terror ordered by the North Korean government. And to carry out this dangerous act of terror, they had a bomb that was cunningly disguised as an ordinary radio and a bottle of liquid explosives, basically a DIY disaster kit. At a layover in Abu Dhabi, the operatives smoothly exited the aircraft and left their explosive-laden luggage behind. It was like a villainous drop and run, but instead of a harmless prank, they left a time bomb that would soon shatter countless lives. Sadly, at around 2:05 p.m., the bomb detonated over the Andaman Sea, and in a split second, the Boeing 707 disintegrated, turning a peaceful flight into an airborne inferno. The plane vanished from the radar, and with it, the hopes and dreams of the 115 people on board. There were no survivors, just heartbroken families left wondering how a routine flight could end so suddenly and tragically. As news of the disaster spread, investigators worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery, and they soon tracked down the 2 North Korean agents who had made their way to Bahrain. When they were apprehended, the male accomplice had cyanide cleverly hidden in his cigarettes and managed to commit suicide, but Kim Hyun-hee, the female agent, was stopped just in time and taken into custody.